Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. Happy New Year to every single one of you, and I mean it's so hard to believe that we're already in 2024. Hasn't the time gone by very, very quickly? And I'm so glad that you've been on the ride with me. And if you're new to the Saroy channel, you are so welcome here. We've got so many fabulous stories, and even though we often have stories in 4 parts, it's really worth tuning in because you're going to get an incredible story that you're not going to get in just 10 or 20 minutes. So it really is worth the ride, as many of my listeners will testify to you. But I'm so glad for your continuous support of my channel, and I love you guys so very much. You're all so precious to me, and big hugs and kisses to all of you because, you know, you are one of a kind. That's all I can say. Everybody that signs up to the Saroy channel has to be one of a kind. That's for sure. And I'm so glad you've joined me tonight because we've got another fabulous, fabulous story that you're just going to love. But before we get started, you know the rules. Subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Helen Greensborough may have been one of the best actresses at St. Clair's private school for girls, but her acting abilities were sorely wanting this late afternoon when she failed to hide her extreme frustration that Mrs. Paisley, her drama teacher, had failed to turn up for rehearsals, which was extremely unusual for the reasonably prudent teacher, that although it was not known for her punctuality, in 20 long years she had never once failed to show up for a rehearsals at St. Clair's. Well, not until now, of course. Helen could not help but feel a tad annoyed. A downward scowl appeared on her pretty face that made her look rather like a belligerent, disgruntled bull terrier. It was amazing how a miserable expression could so easily sour a pretty face. Helen could look quite angelic at times, well, when she wanted to, of course, with her gleaming dark raven hair, fair porcelain skin, and very expressive green eyes. But this afternoon she looked anything but. All she could ponder was what was keeping the larger-than-life, vibrant Mrs. Paisley, who was a bosomous, buxom woman, with breasts that she herself had described as being capable of sinking the Titanic, as they were so incredibly large, making the woman rather top-heavy. "I'd never have drowned in the Titanic," she would joke to her pupils. "Look at me, and these gargantuan breasts of mine. They're like 2 buoyant flotation tanks, aren't they? They would have prevented me from sinking in the Titanic. Too bad the cold would have done me in. At least then I would have been able to say that my breasts had some redeeming purposes after all. These wretched things," she complained. "They're the bane of my life, they really are. Who the hell ever said that breasts were sexy? Big ones, I mean. They should try a pair on for size, and they'd soon change their minds about that pretty fast, let me tell you. I wanted to get them reduced, you know. A long time ago I did. But I guess I'm stuck with them for the foreseeable future. They're not going anywhere. They do give me the most dreadful backache and weigh me down at the end of a hard day, you know. I was even booked in for surgery, was all prepped up for the procedure. But I bolted out of the hospital so fast, like a terrified little rabbit. I saw those surgeons as almost predatory, as if they couldn't wait to get their grisly knives into me and start cutting me up into tiny little pieces. Everyone was looking for me, you know. I just couldn't go through with it. I really couldn't. I actually ran away to a bar 2 hours outside of Seattle, and I'm afraid to say I got horribly drunk, drowning my sorrows. My husband found me in a right old state, he did. You do hear stories, don't you, about things going dreadfully wrong with surgeries. I was so convinced that the surgery was either going to leave me permanently disfigured for the rest of my life, with dreadful scars all over my chest, or invariably I would die on the operating table. I could see it so clearly in my mind's eye, the surgeons panicking as they tried to resuscitate my flagging body, and me being hurriedly transported to the morgue with a sheet over my body. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's the drama queen in me, and it probably is. But then again, there's been a lot of cases, you know, of people having punctured lungs during liposuction procedures and stuff like that, meaning some people never ever wake up from their operations. I've done my research on the matter, you know. They keep this cleverly covered up, as the cosmetic surgery business is worth billions and billions of dollars, and it doesn't do to advertise all the blunders they make, of which there are so many, too many to count. People die under the knife, you know, all the time. It's a lot more common than you think. Unfortunately, things can go horrifically wrong, even when you're in the best of hands, from allergic reactions to the anesthesia, and so many other things that you never even consider. You must remember, to our body when we're having surgery, it has to recover from a major trauma, as if we've been run over by a bus. The body doesn't know any different, does it? So when we've been through a mince grinder, so to speak, it's going to have very grave health implications on us long term. It's a brave, or maybe a foolish person, that goes under the knife, if you ask me. My husband was glad I never went through with the procedures. Turns out he had similar views to my own, and similar fears, so to speak. Over the years, I've learnt to trust my instincts. I knew in my gut that having surgery of any kind was a monumental mistake for me. I guess I'm stuck with these good-for-nothing breasts long term. But I'd rather have these than be pushing up the daisies at my tombstone, believe me. It would seem, despite her voluptuous proportions, Mrs. Paisley was unnaturally graceful and light on her feet, for a woman that was so top-heavy, almost as if in her former life she'd been a ballet dancer of some kind. She would elegantly float into rehearsals, swathed in an opulent cloud of floral notes that she wore on her person so elegantly, like another layer of clothing. Mrs. Paisley never ever wore cheap synthetic fragrances that would make you violently wheeze or cough, but a pleasing bouquet of natural floral notes that reminded you of a wildflower meadow. Furthermore, she dressed in ethereal, bright, colourful, bohemian-looking clothes that floated on her body, as if the gossamer fabric itself was being blown in a soft, gentle breeze. "I like clothes that move with the body," she told her students. "Not clothes that tuck me in so tightly, so that I feel like I'm wearing a corset. I like clothes that breathe naturally on my skin." She'd often wear unusual artistic necklaces that always made a statement, along with striking long dangling earrings that always invited great interest. Everybody wanted to know where she'd brought the unusual eye-catching jewellery. Mrs. Paisley's pieces of jewellery came from all parts of the globe, from some of the most curious places that she'd visited, like open markets in Bangladesh, a little alcove in Florence, Italy, or a tiny antique shop in Cornwall, England. The much-beloved drama teacher had become like a familiar fixture and fitting at St. Clair's for over 20 years. She was the most favoured teacher the school had ever known. Everybody loved her. She masterfully taught French, English composition and drama, with an impassioned dedication and eager enthusiasm that was so incredibly infectious the pupils had naturally responded by producing effortlessly easy high grades. Everybody unanimously believed this was a reflection of Mrs. Paisley's idiosyncratic teaching skills that were far from conventional. Mrs. Paisley never followed the book on how you were expected to teach your pupils. She did things exclusively her own way. Indeed, in Mrs. Paisley's classes, no pupil had ever failed any of her subjects, which was a testament to her remarkable teaching abilities, which had been recognised and appreciated by the school's head, Mrs. Dickinson, who had described her star teacher as one of a kind. Even those pupils a little slow to learning had surprised their own parents by their astonishing good grades, seen only in the classes that were taught exclusively by Mrs. Paisley. "You mark my words," Mrs. Dickinson was proudly known to have said about Mrs. Paisley, whom was naturally her all-time favourite teacher at St. Clair's. They broke the mould when they made that woman, you know. If more teachers were exactly like her, the pupils would be leaving school with first-class honours, without even trying. Some teachers, you know, are like master gardeners. They know how to tweak a plant, prune it, make it grow, almost as if they've got green fingers. Likewise, Mrs. Paisley brings out the blossoms on her students. They flourish under her instruction. She turns a demure little shrub into a showy display of flowery blooms. Too bad I can't make duplicate copies of her. Believe me, I would have her teaching in every classroom at St. Clair's, and we'd have the highest success rate of any school in the borough. Mrs. Paisley had a natural acumen for stringing words together. She had successfully published 2 books of fiction, which was why it was promptly decided that English composition should be conducted with Mrs. Paisley at the helm, so that she could help her students learn to express themselves better through the power of the written word. Who better to teach you how to write than an author herself? It was also the reason why she'd personally written her own interpretation of the school play, that was soon to be shown in front of a live audience. The play was Murder on the Orient Express, with Hercule Poirot, the leading character being played by Helen Greensborough herself. The illustrious Mrs. Paisley had a bubbly personality, a great dry sense of humour that was contagious. You couldn't help but love her. She successfully made the mediocre predictability of school life, with its structured routines and strict disciplines, infinitely more palatable for all the pupils at St. Clair's. Helen Greensborough had often thought that for her years at school would have been a lot more enjoyable if the teachers had been as fun as Mrs. Paisley was, as her winning, gregarious personality would always make you laugh, complemented by her impassioned, dramatic gestures and changeable facial expressions that were always endearingly comical. Some of the staff at the school were very formidable, especially Mr. Longstock, who taught science, and when you entered his classroom, it always felt like a morgue in there. His long-suffering lessons were delivered in a repetitive, uninspiring wooden drawl that was so incredibly dull that Helen had struggled to keep her eyes open during class, and as a consequence her science grades were quite appalling, which had not best pleased her father.
"It doesn't make any sense, Helen. You get straight A's for English and French, but you get an E for science. This is an absolute joke. No daughter of mine should be getting grades this low. It's an embarrassment to me, love. You're going to have to pull your socks up."
"But, Dad," she would explain, "Mr. Longstock is so incredibly boring. You have no idea. It's hard to remember anything he teaches. His lessons just go on and on. You feel as if there's no end to them."
"That's no excuse, love," he would say indignantly. "You need to concentrate in your class, and especially if the teacher is boring, then you need to pay even more attention. I'm paying very good money for that private school you're going to. The very least you can do in the circumstances is to pay attention during class. The truth be told, Helen, I think you're being bone idle. You've decided you don't like science, so you're not even going to bother to try in class."
"Dad, that's not true. You don't understand. I challenge you to sit through one of Mr. Longstock's lessons, and then you'd understand how I feel." Helen knew it wasn't the science that was the problem. It was the uninspiring way the subject was being taught, but her father never understood what she was going on about. He thought she was talking absolute nonsense. Then there was math, which was a subject Helen despised with a burning passion. The Irish teacher who taught math, Mrs. Carbuncle, was as shrewd as a hawk, and was known by her pupils as the giraffe. She was incredibly tall for a woman measuring 6'2", with legs that appeared to go on for ever and ever. When she appeared in assembly for morning prayers, she towered over all the other teachers, making them all look like little midgets, which Helen always found decidedly funny. For some reason, Mrs. Carbuncle religiously pounced on Helen during classes. It wasn't as if she stood out, so Helen couldn't figure out why she was always picked on. She didn't wear thick glasses, nor did she have bright orange hair, nor was she a roly-poly that rolled into class like a sizable beach ball. But for some reason Mrs. Carbuncle could smell her insouciance like a cadaver dog might smell a corpse. so that Helen would be dragged to the front of the classroom in a moment of humiliation that was so conspicuous that would make her wish the floor would swallow her whole. Mrs. Carbuncle would make her complete the math equation in front of the entire class that she had drawn up on the blackboard. It would seem Helen was always kept on her toes in math, and thankfully, due to Mrs. Carbuncle's shrewd no-nonsense approach to teaching, Helen's math grades had fared reasonably well, unlike the train wreck of her science grades. Helen's whole world revolved around drama. She dreamed of becoming an actress one day. So with Mrs. Paisley being 20 minutes late for the rehearsal, it was beginning to irk her considerably, as her drama teacher had never once let her pupils down. Well, not until now, that is. It was 3:00 in the afternoon at St. Clair's. The lobby cleared of all students and teachers, rather like a beach after a tsunami has hit. Most of the pupils had long since left the school, that finished at 2:10 promptly every day. The corridor was sequestered and lonely, deprived of the cheerful banter of the pupils that were usually armed to the nines with books, navigating their way through the corridors of St. Clair's, to get from one classroom to the next in a hum of idle chatter. The bashfully reticent son was eager to make a quick retreat, rather like the long-suffering students had done, leaving the school premises after a long, hard day. It was ominously silent at St. Clair's, and the only signs of any active life were located in the school hall, where the gathering of eager drama students flocked together like a cluster of geese for their rehearsal of the school play. Helen Greensborough was concerned about her role as the esteemed famous Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, in their rendition of Murder on the Orient Express. She still hadn't grasped the Belgium accent yet, but Mrs. Paisley was helping her brush up her act to get her accent as close to perfect as she possibly could. But it was quite a laborious struggle to get it exactly right. Luckily, Mrs. Paisley was fluent at French, and her help in assisting Helen with her accent had been invaluable. Helen admitted that when she appeared on stage, wearing a top hat along with a distinguished moustache that was a signature prerequisite of the esteemed Belgian detective, she began to feel like she really had morphed into the lovable character with his shrewd dark brown eyes and very discerning disposition. She was thoroughly enjoying playing a male role for a change. Previously, most of her parts had been female, so playing a man was a whole new challenge for her. In the beginning, she'd struggled to deepen her voice, but she'd been working on it, even though she thought she sounded a little squeaky at times, rather like an old scratchy record being played over and over again. Often when she tried to lower her voice, she'd suddenly start to cough and splutter, as her throat would tickle so much. But she had found drinking warm honey and lemon before rehearsals had made those unfortunate side effects lessen dramatically, and her voice was beginning to sound a whole lot smoother of late. Mrs. Paisley had told her that she had initially moved like a flamingo on stage, that she needed to walk with due purpose, with a high-standing deportment like the detective would have done. You must remember Hercule Poirot was a haughty, stuck-up man. He was very proud, you know. He didn't suffer fools gladly. I want you to walk on that stage, Helen, like a pompous, self-assured man who owns the stage, commands the attention and respect of the entire audience. Don't you dare pussyfoot around, Helen, as if you don't know your left leg from your right. You must remember there is no hesitancy, no reluctant insecurity with a man like Hercule Poirot, who is very self-assured. When he speaks, everybody needs to pay attention to his words. He's an old-fashioned sleuth, one of those annoyingly perceptive people that can read between the lines. He's as sharp as an eagle-eyed hawk, very, very observant. I want the audience out there to go completely quiet the moment you walk out on stage, Helen. You must command a stage presence, like the kind of person that everybody notices the moment they enter the room. Do you understand what I'm saying, Helen? If anybody can pull this off, my love, it's you, which is why I chose you specifically for the part. You were made to be on stage, Helen.
and I want your light to shine. Do you understand?"
"Yes, Mrs. Paisley," she had said. Regretfully, there were only 2 weeks left for Helen to polish up her performance, and playing the part of the Belgian detective was going to be challenging. But Helen loved challenges. The play would be shown to an audience of both parents and pupils alike, and Helen wanted to wow the audience with her unwavering star quality that had made her become a favoured pupil of Mrs. Paisley's over the last couple of years, when Mrs. Paisley had marvelled at the promise of her aspiring pupil. Helen knew she was talented when it came to acting, but there was still room for improvement, no matter how good you were. Mrs. Paisley would help her sharpen her performance, and Helen had been looking forward to the rehearsal all day. The day had dragged on so slowly, at an agonizing, reluctant, sloth-like pace, with the usual boring subjects to while away the long, insufferable hours. And now that she was in the school hall at St. Clair's, eagerly waiting for Mrs. Paisley to finally make her appearance, it seemed like this inauspicious day appeared to be growing significantly longer and longer and longer, rather like a never-ending elastic band that stretches out to twice its size and appears to have no end or beginning. It didn't help, of course, that the sky had become decidedly more gloomy, as if the afternoon was about to invite some rain. Indeed, all the drama pupils were likely feeling rather down in the dumps. They were waiting impatiently in the school hall, sitting in the chairs opposite the stage, with their faces turned towards the open door that overlooked the long, sweeping but empty corridor. Much like Helen, they were hoping Mrs. Paisley would help them tweak their acting skills before the big day, when they all hoped that their lights, that they had kept under a bushel for so long, would shine before the entire school, so their audience would be dazzled by their winning performances. This would be unlikely to happen if Mrs. Paisley didn't help them refine their acting skills, with a nip here and a tuck there, rather like a skilled seamstress, determined to make the dress worn on that special day absolutely perfect. What on earth had happened to their drama teacher? She should have been here over 20 long minutes ago. The time was marching away steadily, and dissipating as fast as the smoke from a chimney. The drama students kept anxiously glancing at the door, watching, waiting and hoping for any promising signs of movement in the school corridor. But still Mrs. Paisley had not graced them with her presence. Where the hell was she? Were the thoughts that danced from one pupil to the next. But for a long time no one articulated their growing concerns, until Helen broke the sombre mood by saying what everybody else was so obviously thinking. "There's something going on here," said Helen, rather soberly to her fellow drama students. "You know Mrs. Paisley as well as I do. She's never been this late before, has she? I know she's not precisely punctual, but she's never late either. Do you think something's wrong? I'm really worried about her, and I'm also worried about our play. It's going to be presented in 2 weeks' time. We're running out of time." "Maybe she's got waylaid," said Sandra, shrugging her shoulders nonchalantly. "I mean, is it a big deal if she's late for once in a lifetime? I'm sure she's absolutely fine." But even Sandra did not look convinced by the words she uttered, that failed to match the disquiet in her eyes. "It is a big deal," said Elsa. "A very big deal, if you must know. Do you realise, guys, there's only 2 weeks left until we perform in front of the entire school and our parents. And I don't know about you, but I for one don't want our play to be a disaster. There's no doubt in my mind that if we don't rehearse our lines, it will be a significant setback for the all of us. There's plenty of room for improvement in our individual roles to this play. I'm sorry, but there is. I hate stating the blindingly obvious. It's such a bummer, isn't it, that Mrs. Paisley's not here yet? I can't believe this is happening to us, as we're running out of time, and I'm beginning to panic a little. I'm still not feeling entirely confident about my performance yet. I hate to say this, but Elsa's absolutely right. I mean, even missing one rehearsal is a distinct disadvantage for us. It's a short countdown to the play. Before you know it, we'll actually be up there on that stage. in front of a live audience. And I, for one, want our performance to be better than good. Mrs. Paisley herself was only saying yesterday that she was reasonably worried that we didn't have enough time left to nip the play into shape, to get it exactly right. I've been worried about that myself. It's like the time has just been swallowed up, like the sands in an hourglass. I'm personally rather concerned about my Belgium accent. I need to pull off the character of Hercule Poirot with such a conviction that everybody in that entire audience doesn't doubt for a single second that I am indeed the esteemed detective Hercule Poirot himself. I feel a little uncertain about a few of my lines that I want Mrs. Paisley to help me with, but her not being here is so frustrating. Let's not kid. It's frustrating for all of us. I don't think any of us are remotely worried about you, said Elsa, unable to hide the scoff on her face. You know very well, Helen, that your performance of Hercule Poirot has been brilliant to date. Don't even try to deny it. You're outstandingly talented, and you know it. The rest of us need help, not you. As for your Belgium accent, I think it's perfect. I'm the one that's got to sound posh in my part, and I'm really struggling with that. I'm supposed to be a frivolous, stinking rich woman. I've got to speak as if I've got a plum in my mouth, and honestly I'm finding my part a little daunting, as nothing about me in my real life is remotely posh. Even my mother says my table manners are very sloppy. You're being hard on yourself, Elsa, said Helen encouragingly. Too self-critical, if you ask me. That's your problem. The best way to get into a character is to become that person. That's what I find. It's like playing dress rehearsal. You shed your current personality, as if it's an old layer of clothes that no longer serves you, and then you become a brand new person, the person you're pretending to be. You need to believe, Elsa, that you're a stuck-up snob with a superior, precocious, vainglorious attitude who believes she's better than anybody else. You become her, and once you really believe you are her, your character will then become believable. It's so easy for you to say, Helen, said Elsa, but you just slip into your part so easily. The rest of us have to work at it, and I mean really work at it. Don't complain, Elsa. Listen to yourself. I'd give anything to get the grades you get in science, and you aren't half bad on the sports field either, said Helen, pausing for a moment, as concern dappled her face when she glanced down at the time on her cell phone. This is getting ridiculous. I'm sorry, guys, but it is. I've never known Mrs. Paisley to be this late. Do you think we should call her and tell her we've been waiting for 20 minutes? Isn't that a bit rude? Asked Sandra. I mean, she's running late. That's hardly a criminal offence, is it? I, for one, don't want to embarrass her and make her feel really bad. Mrs. Paisley's such a lovely lady. I don't think we should offend her like that. This isn't about making anyone feel bad, least of all Mrs. Paisley, said Helen circumspectly. But don't you see, it's so unlike her not to turn up for rehearsals. In truth, I suspect she's probably more passionate about getting the play into shape than we actually are. I mean, if we succeed, it always throws her in a good light, doesn't it? As a drama teacher, I mean. She's got an excellent reputation here at St. Clair's, and I'm sure she wants to keep it that way, does she not? She's invested in our performances as much as we are, probably more so. All the drama pupils exchanged worried glances between themselves, as if they felt as if they were stuck between a rock and a hard place, as to know what to do about their missing drama teacher. It would be embarrassing to make a sizable fuss, especially if the woman suddenly turned up, looking apologetic for holding everybody up. There were all kinds of reasons the woman could be late. She might have been held up in traffic. She might have to do something she wasn't expecting, like visiting a family friend who had suddenly taken ill. Or she might have had an accident, and that was a thought that nobody wanted to entertain. For school life without Mrs. Paisley just didn't bear thinking about. Look, said Sandra gingerly. I think we should wait a little bit longer. We should give it about half an hour to 45 minutes before we call her. I still think something came up for her. That's why she hasn't been able to get in touch. People can get into all kinds of pickles, can't they? I remember 2 years ago my dad never came home for several hours. My mother began to panic. No one knew where he was. It turned out his sister Patricia had a stroke, and he was running around after her like a hen without a head. He was in such a state that he never even bothered to phone my mother. He clean forgot, until he calmed down. So he was caught up in the moment, I suspect, and then his cell phone was off. Maybe something like that happened to Mrs. Paisley. That's all I'm saying. Well, you're probably right, said Elsa. I think we should do something, don't you? We should take the initiative and practice our own lines without Mrs. Paisley around. We could act our parts on stage like we would if Mrs. Paisley were actually here. Maybe, Helen, you can be Mrs. Paisley. You'd be a fabulous director. You can watch our performances. You can guide us through our lines. Tell us where we're going wrong. You can deny it all you like, Helen, but none of us are remotely worried about your performance. You're the one nobody has to worry about. You're going to rock up there on stage. The rest of us need your help, and I think you can show us what you would do if you were playing our parts, so that we can appear more professional. That's not a bad idea, Helen agreed. I'll be happy to help if I can. I've always rather fancied myself as a director, so there's no time like the present. I'll do it. Before long, the drama students were playing their parts on the school stage, and Helen was doing an excellent job in helping them tweak their performances. She decided she quite fancied being a director. It was almost as fun as acting out a part. Almost, not quite. Elsa, if you don't mind my saying so, you've walked onto the stage like a timid church mouse, she said, shaking her head vigorously. I'm sorry, but that is never ever going to work. It's like you're apologizing for even existing. I told you you need to step into the part. Remember, you're an entitled woman. You've had everything money could possibly buy you all your life. You're spoiled, precocious, self-centered, privileged, and used to getting anything you want at a drop of a hat. In short, you're not a terribly nice person. When you tweak your fingers, everybody comes running to you. You want the audience not to like you at all. You don't want to gain any favour from them. They are going to love disliking you. That's the whole point of your character. You're horrible. Don't forget that. You are supposed to look down on Mr. Hercule Poirot. You think of him as a silly detective who you don't hold in very high regard. He, on the other hand, which is me, will think you're a bit ditzy and outrageously over the top, that you're a silly woman. You know you can't behave bashful like you're doing now. It's not the part, it's not the character you're playing. You need to come onto the stage, own the space with a confident grandeur. You need to wave your arms around nonchalantly in the air, as if everything about this moment is centered completely around you and nothing else matters. You mean like this? Said Elsa, strutting onto the stage and oscillating her arms around with an ethereal grace, and lifting up her head in a superior angle that suggested she thought everybody else in her midst was just simply pond life. That's perfect, Elsa. So much better. I can't tell you the difference. Remember, you need to carry off that haughty, superior attitude. You want to make Hercule Poirot think you're an airhead with tons of money and absolutely no brains. And the audience is going to feel much the same about you. They're going to love hating you. That's the whole idea. Goodness gracious me, said Helen, briefly glancing down at her cell phone. Can you believe it? We've been doing this for an hour and a half. And Mrs. Paisley still hasn't shown up yet. The timer's disappeared this afternoon. I don't know where it went to. I think I'm going to call her, said Helen. This time she was determined to take the bull by the horns and stab Mrs. Paisley's number on her cell phone before she could change her mind, or any of the other drama students had time to dissuade her from taking such an initiative. What's wrong? Asked Sandra, as Helen made a frustrated grimace. It just goes straight to voicemail, she told her. Mrs. Paisley's not answering her cell. I think I'll phone Mr. Paisley. I know he works from home. I've actually got his cell phone number, as he and my father regularly play bridge together. What What's wrong? Asked Sandra. Why are you grimacing, Helen? Are you not getting through to Mrs. Paisley? No, I'm not. It goes straight to voicemail. It's so annoying. Mrs. Paisley's not answering. I think I'd better phone Mr. Paisley instead. I know he works from home. I've actually got his cell phone number, as he and my father regularly play bridge together. They know each other quite well. Everybody waited in abject silence as Helen phoned Mr. Paisley's number. It was almost as if they were holding their breath, waiting to hear if Mr. Paisley could shed any light on the enigmatic mystery of his wife's inexplicable disappearance.
Ralph Paisley speaking. How can I help you? Came a rich male voice at the end of the line.
Hello, Mr. Paisley. This is Helen Greensborough speaking. I'm Reginald Greensborough's daughter. You play bridge with my father. Your wife teaches me drama at St. Clair's. I'm the one playing the part of Hercule Poirot. I don't know if she told you about me. You know, the famous Belgium detective.
Oh, yes, Helen. I do remember you very well, as it happens. My wife talks most favourably about you. She says you're her most promising pupil, and a very talented actress too. Shouldn't you be doing a rehearsal with her right now and the other students at St. Clair's in the school hall? I know my wife is concerned that you only have 2 weeks left before you play Murder on the Orient Express on the school stage to a public audience. I'm definitely coming to see that, you know. It's one of my favourite dramas. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. What is this phone call about, Helen? How can I help you?
Well, it's about your wife, Mr. Paisley. She never turned up for the rehearsal today at school. We thought she was running late, so we rehearsed on our own. We waited for her to arrive, but she never came. One of the girls went out back to the parking lot to look for her white Toyota, or whatever you call that car, with the bear sticker on it that says, "I love all things sweet because I'm honey." The sticker was given to her by Julia Jarvis. It makes your wife's car very conspicuous. Besides, she usually always parks under the old oak tree every single day. People consider that her exclusive parking space. But her car was nowhere to be seen. So I don't even think she arrived at St. Clair's. I'm worried about her, Mr. Paisley. She's not with you by any chance? Or you don't happen to know where she could be? We're just all worried about her. She's our favourite teacher. We'd hate for anything untoward to have happened to her. She's never ever missed one of her rehearsals before. She'd normally tell us in advance if she wasn't going to make it. There was a long, uncomfortable pause at the end of the line, and Mr. Paisley cleared his throat uncomfortably.
Are you absolutely sure? My wife's car is not in the parking bay at St. Clair's. May she not have parked somewhere else, perhaps? Maybe somebody else parked under the oak tree where she normally parks, and my wife had to park somewhere else.
Absolutely sure, Mr. Paisley. I know her car well enough. It's very easy to spot. Very distinctive it is. Furthermore, everyone left school a long time ago at 2:10 in the afternoon. So if your wife were here, her car would likely be the only one there, unless one of our parents arrived to pick us up from drama early, which never ever happens, as our classes tend to go on for longer than anticipated.
So she's not there at your rehearsal?
Helen let out a sigh. How many times did she have to assure this man his wife's car was not on the school grounds? I'm afraid not, Mr. Paisley. Regretfully, she never pitched at all. We're naturally very concerned about her welfare. I mean, as I was saying, your wife's never failed to show up for class before. This is out of character for her. I'm sure you will agree with that.
I will agree with you there, young lady. That is most strange, said Mr. Paisley. My wife would never willingly fail to turn up for one of your rehearsals, so I cannot think why she's so obviously waylaid.
You don't think she could have had an accident, Mr. Paisley? Should we not phone the hospitals to ask if anyone meeting your wife's description has been taken in ill, or has been brought into a hospital due to an accident? I don't want to alarm you, Mr. Paisley, I really don't, but I'm trying to think outside of the box here. Some of the scenarios I'm envisaging aren't good, I'm afraid. The last thing I want to do is cause you undue panic. But I'm so concerned about your wife, Mr. Paisley.
Helen, I really appreciate your concern. But with the greatest of respect, it's way too early to call the hospitals like you are suggesting I should do. You don't do that kind of thing unless you're certain someone is really missing. It's too early to even consider my wife as a missing person. If my wife had an accident, her identification would be on her person. I would have already been notified by the police. But I'm sure that it's all just a storm in the teacup that will blow over in any moment. Just you watch this space, Helen. My wife will be walking through that door with a big smile on her face, wondering what all the fuss was about. She possibly clean forgot about the rehearsal. Believe it or not, despite what you may think, my wife has been known from time to time to be a tad absent-minded.
You do surprise me saying that. Your wife always strikes me as a rather prudent woman. But I hope you're right, Mr. Paisley. I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I feel rather uneasy about this whole business. I just hope that your wife is all right. If you need to contact me, just call me back on this number. I'd be very grateful if you could keep me posted and updated. I can't relax until I know your wife's safe. Besides, everyone in drama is so worried about her. I need to let them know that she's safe and well.
I am most sure, Helen, that my wife is safe and well. But I assure you, I will be in touch with you as soon as the silly minx walks through the front door, obliviously unaware of how much angst she's caused to the all of us. Thank you for phoning me, Helen. I appreciate it very much. And I must apologize on my wife's behalf that she never made it to rehearsals today. But I'm sure she had good reason for not showing up.
There's no need to apologize for that, Mr. Paisley. All I care about is that your wife is all right. Reginald Paisley's daughter had been casually languishing on their sumptuously cosy couch in the family living room, watching a television programme about the migratory routes of the whale species, when her father had taken the call from Helen Greensborough. Charlotte Paisley wanted to become a marine biologist one day. She was in her final year at St. Clair's School for Girls. She paused the remote control on the television and stared up at her father, for she had caught the wispy tail end of his conversation. Her ears were wagging. It was through dark, earnest eyes that she asked him gingerly, "Dad, what was that about? Were you speaking to Helen Greensborough from school?" She furrowed her brow, looking up at her father incredulously, as if she wanted to be assured that what she thought she'd heard was just a misunderstanding. It had to be, surely. "Dad, why did Helen Greensborough phone you? What's going on? Is Mum all right? What's all this stuff about phoning the hospitals? Nothing bad's happened to her, has it?"
"Don't you worry about your mum. I'm sure she's absolutely fine," said Mr. Paisley, clearing his throat. His dark brown eyes looked troubled. "Look, Charlotte, I don't know what to say to you. I'm not exactly sure where your mother is right now. Yes, that was Helen Greensborough on the phone. She was saying your mother never turned up for drama rehearsal at school. Her white Toyota was not parked in her usual shaded spot under the oak tree, or anywhere else for that matter in the parking bay. I gather it was totally empty. It seems your mother never arrived at the school for rehearsals, and she's not here, so I haven't got the first clue where in the world she is."
"Dad, that's terrible," said Charlotte, wrinkling up her face in an expression of grave disquiet. "Mum would never not turn up for rehearsal at school. You know how important the rehearsals are to her, especially with a deadline around the very next corner. I mean, the play is in 2 weeks' time. Dad, we have to phone the police at once. Something bad's happened to her. I can feel it in my bones. I don't feel good about this."
"For goodness sake, Charlotte, calm down, will you? We are not phoning the police, for goodness sake. Please don't overreact. Your mother has not even been gone for 24 hours. The police wouldn't even take us seriously if we went into the station to file a missing persons report. It's far too early to go down that route. Besides, your mother is an independent adult who's entitled to do her own thing. That's the way it is, I'm afraid, according to the law."
"But that's ridiculous. Mum is missing.
We don't know that for sure, love. There may be all manner of reasons why your mother may not have turned up for her rehearsals today.
So there we are. That is the end of part 1 of our story tonight, which is fantastic. So I look forward to you joining me next on tomorrow's session. Until next time, goodbye and good night.